Given the latest developments, we are now at the 90% level on a widely watched countdown to artificial general intelligence. Also, did you know that humanoid robots are now being used in factories all over the globe? We're going to talk about one of the companies that's in the lead in making these robots. And lastly, AI is not just being widely integrated into businesses globally, but also government operations, including the military. We're going to cover all of the latest AI and robotics news with you today. Joining us on the show is Dr. Alan D. Thompson. He's a leading AI expert and researcher. He writes the world's most widely read AI newsletter called The Memo, which is continually read, cited, and used by major governments and corporations all over the world when it comes to tracking developments on AI, robotics, brain-machine interfaces, and more. If you want to stay on the cutting edge, sign up for The Memo at lifearchitect.ai/memo. Dr. Thompson, thank you for joining us again.
Thanks again for having me, Chris. I think, what is this, our sixth or our seventh update on the world of AI in the last couple of years?
I think so. And we have continued to see explosive changes, and particularly in relation to your last memo, which you just sent out a few weeks back. I want to quote what you say. You say that this is our most significant addition in a while. The announcements in the last 2 weeks were extraordinary, with a record 10 additions to the AGI countdown this month. So tell us, what did we see happen over the last few weeks or so?
Yeah, I don't know whether to say that was expected or unexpected, but it was definitely a very exciting February into March 2025. The model releases, of course, but I think the big thing over the last few weeks has been the progress in humanoid robots. Those are robots that look like a person and are able to interact with our world that's been designed for people, hitting production, being used in Foxconn, being used at Audi, being used in massive factories, and also being available for the home. We've kind of been waiting on that for 2 or 3 years, and I thought it was slow 2 or 3 years ago, but it's almost like someone's lit a match under 14, 15, 16 of these humanoid robot companies, and that's been the big thing in the last few weeks.
Yeah, and who would you say is currently in the lead in terms of making these humanoid robots? I know that there's quite a number of different companies that do so, but which, from your research, where are you seeing some of the most impressive advancements so far?
They're coming from all over, which is really interesting to see. In some of the big, the FANG companies, or in tech in general, we've mainly got it just coming out of San Francisco. But when it comes to this stuff, we've got big stuff out of China, big stuff out of Germany, big stuff out of Norway for the 1X company that's backed by OpenAI, big stuff out of Israel, and even Canada. So NVIDIA's CEO jumped up on stage just a few months ago and showed 14 working humanoid robots in production, and there are even more than that. My favourite are the 1X Gamma or Neo Gamma that's available out of Norway, the Unitree H1 out of China. I'm sure you've seen the Tesla, which is kind of interesting, the Optimus that they've had going for quite a while. Boston Dynamics are still there in the fray, but the number one discussion point right now is Figure AI's Figure 02 and Figure 03 that's available both in companies and now in homes. Incredible.
Yeah, so we have, like you said, there's this company that's in California, that's Figure AI. And then we also have, it seems like Unitree as well, which has been getting a lot of attention. Those seem to be in the lead. Would I be incorrect, or are there any other companies that you would say are clearly dominant in this space?
Yeah, they're two of the big ones. I'd also add UB Tech there out of China. Their Walker S1 humanoid robot is powered by DeepSeek R1. Now, we know how crazy that went in the media when, the common people found out about R1, people that had no AI experience but were speaking about this extraordinary model trained for very little money comparatively. Well, it's now backing a humanoid robot that's available in the Volkswagen, Audi, BYD and Foxconn factories. That one's worth watching. The other one that I mentioned earlier is that 1X Neo Gamma humanoid robot. That's a fully clothed humanoid robot. We saw it doing really fine detailed work in terms of opening up a brand new phone, peeling off that little plastic sticker that's on top of the phone, and doing stuff around the house. We've seen it before, making coffee, helping sorting out the wardrobe, those kinds of things that are something that I'm going to be using it for as soon as it comes out. That and wiping down my benches.
Oh, so you're planning on actually buying one for your own personal use?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I've got to try this thing out. I've got a little budget set aside for it. The common quoted figure for these things at the moment is about 30 to 40,000 US dollars for a humanoid robot from the likes of Tesla or 1X. But we want to be able to get that down. I'm sure it will come down not just to 10 to 20,000 USD, but eventually, in the cases of some of these bots that are going to be helping build each other, in the case of the Aptronic Apollo humanoid robot, that's the humanoid robot powered by Google DeepMind, it's designed to build and repair itself. So it's actually being deployed on the production line for itself. That's the Apollo humanoid robot production line. And it's there kind of putting itself together. If we have these humanoid robots mining our ore, processing the metal, designing the ICs, designing the actuators, and also building them, we get down, and it's a very difficult discussion, but we get down to we no longer need to pay for these things. As in, there wouldn't be much sense in having an economic model like we have now in early 2025 if everything's being created, repaired, maintained for free. Obviously, humans will get in the way of that, but it makes a lot of sense to me to have these valued at $0 effectively now and having these available to everyone.
Yeah, so as you said, I mean, we're seeing tremendous progress in humanoid robots. They're being used in factories like at Foxconn, Audi, increasingly in places around the world. And they're becoming more and more humanoid, doing all the tasks that you would expect people to do. And now even increasingly in the home. And we're starting to see the early stages of that as well. And one of the big things, I think, is the fact that we are seeing the prices of those come down as more competitors enter the market.
Yeah, that's been a big surprise to me because just in 2021-ish, we had OpenAI with their early foray into robots. They had a robot arm that could do some spinning around of a Rubik's Cube and solving of a Rubik's Cube. Then we had the old dog like the Boston Dynamics and the Honda Asimo. You remember that one? I remember going to see that one in about 2002, so more than 2 decades ago now. There were very few contenders in the humanoid robot space. Today, we're probably looking at about 100 jumping around different countries, all with different concepts of how they would actually have the robot move, how they would get the actuators to control movement with their precise torque, or have the servos actually have the motion appear smoothly. All of this is really fiddly stuff, but like I said, we've got people fighting for it from Canada, China, US, Norway, Germany, and beyond.
Yeah, and they're becoming much more sensitive, should we say, in terms of their tactile sensory perception and just how able they're able to use the fingers. So, I mean, the improvements continue. And then we're seeing improvements in battery chemistry, which makes them lighter, more efficient. You don't have to charge them as much. So there's a lot of different things that are all coming together to see, like you said, continuing progress in the humanoid space.
Absolutely right. Yeah, there's some fascinating stuff that's coming out. Just in the last few weeks, a company called Sanctuary AI showed us some progress where each finger is completely touch sensitive and even lights up, and it's able to do handling of test tubes, handling of stuff in the lab. This is just part of the progress. I suppose touch sensitivity is a big part of this, but consider that we don't yet have all the 5 senses. We're missing smell and touch. We have, the other 3 going pretty well. That would be movement or feel, sight, and hearing. It does really, really well on that. But I'm looking for the full 5 to be implemented in a humanoid robot where it can build IKEA furniture for me, and that would be enough to say we're at 100% artificial general intelligence, or AGI.
I think this does bring up a quote that you highlighted in your most recent memo. And I love how at the beginning of every one of your memos, you typically have a quote that is kind of defining the zeitgeist or whatever is capturing a lot of people's attention right now when it comes to thinking about AI and robotics. Do you mind reading the one that you highlighted from Anthropic's CEO?
Absolutely. On the 19th of February 2025, Anthropic's CEO, that's Dario Amodei, said, "If someone dropped a new country into the world with 10 million people smarter than any human alive today, you'd ask the question, what's their intent? What are they actually going to do in the world? Particularly if they're able to act autonomously." Dario's referring to very, very smart large language models that are at genius level. Part of my old life, designing or helping with families of prodigies. What if you had 10 million prodigies or 10 million Einsteins available to you? Some would say that's already possible now with deep research or with some of these other models. And what does that look like as we progress?
Yeah, because that's what we're talking about is limitless intelligence, right? I mean, if you have the ability to create these models and they are proliferating very quickly and they're super intelligent, as your work shows. I mean, when you look at the benchmarks that they're being evaluated at, excelling well above human intelligence on a variety of different areas. Well, when you have millions of these things available, that makes for a very different world.
Absolutely. And it's not just the smarts of models like Claude or GPT, it's the fact that everyone is in this race now, or certainly a lot of different companies. So I release a report every 6 months or so. Talking this morning, early March 2025, there have been 43 major new large language models released since the beginning of the year, which is outrageous. You know, the public mainly know about Gemini, GPT, Claude, maybe about the O series, O1 and O3, but we've got so many companies in the fray here releasing their own large language models to compete with ChatGPT. So that's 43 just in the last few weeks for a total of 539 major large language models available out there.
Yeah, and that number is just going to keep growing, right? I mean, we're not going to see just 500. And we're also going to continue to see more and more robots being used, again, in the factory floor, in the office space, at home. So between the models on the software side and between the robots on the hardware side, they're going to continue proliferating. There is a need. I mean, this is clear even if you look at Figure AI's website. They talk about all the unfilled jobs in warehouses that are necessary. And they are saying we're going to fill those with these robots. And we're talking about millions of jobs globally that are in need that these robots can fill.
Absolutely, and the examples I've seen is it's the very, very boring jobs. It's the playing around with metal in the car factories. It's screwing in bolts, that kind of thing. This is a really serious evolution for humanity. I do like to remember that when these humanoids are working, we're not just looking at replacing an 8-hour day or a 40-hour week. These things can work 24/7. One other thing to remember is they don't even need the lights on. So you can have a factory completely in the dark, running 24/7 and spitting out the output of what would normally be a person doing a pretty boring or tedious job.
Yeah, absolutely. So the work that can be done can be very routine, tedious. That can be done by robots, of course, but then the large language models, as you show on the software side, I mean, we're now moving, and this is something I'd love to get your thoughts on because one of the defining descriptions now for where we're at in AI or where we're moving into is this idea of agentic AI. Can you tell us about that? That seems to be the big buzzword now.
Yeah, so outside of physically embodied large language models, that's our humanoid robots, if we just come back to large language models hooked up to your computer, that's a very plain English way of looking at what an agent is. Can I have an LLM that runs an automated loop to do task X for me? We've seen this being implemented over the last 24 months via various companies. There's some really big companies here in Australia in the ASX 100 that use agents for things like doing their insurance premium stuff, not just sending emails, but actually walking through that document workflow or that entire business process. This has always been something that we've been aiming for because it allows us to match the cognitive performance of an analyst or someone who might sit at a desk in their cubicle doing pretty rote or routine work. The agents are looking to be pretty advanced already in early 2025. Everyone's on top of this. Google and OpenAI in particular are on top of this. And I'm looking forward to seeing a big release from OpenAI shortly on agents that might cost in the order of 20,000 USD to use, but perhaps can replace a big team of very, very smart analysts.
Yeah, and I mean, just to think of this in a simple way, I mean, really, agentic AI is just the idea that we're scaling up farther and farther on the autonomy ladder, right? I mean, we're moving to more and more autonomous systems that have the ability to handle a wider range of tasks so that you could, just as you would train a robot on a factory floor for a certain routine task, well, now you could also train an AI, as we're seeing currently, to do a number of things on your very computer that you would do previously. So that's the idea, is that it has a little bit more agency or autonomy.
Absolutely right, yeah. And this is worth noting that none of this stuff is scripted or pre-programmed. Just like you will have experienced with ChatGPT, it can encounter any possibility, run a scenario, and like all large language models, it will just predict the statistically most likely next token. So an agent or an LLM that's agentified or agentic can run into an issue and actually resolve that without it being told what to do. It's not like the old days of programming in things or having a pre-programmed or scripted routine. This is definitely not the concept of running a loop or a script. This is something completely different where it will be happy to be able to encounter something that it's not seen before and then give the most likely best response, and away it goes.
Yeah, and I would say a really good way of thinking about that would just be in terms of like full self-driving, where a car can navigate on the road and it can encounter all sorts of different random, unexpected things, and it knows how to get around, navigate those. I actually, for the first time, I had hailed a full self-driving taxi when I was in San Francisco a couple weeks back. And there was no driver. It was just me and my family, and they were everywhere. I mean, they were all over San Francisco, driving all by themselves. And it was quite amazing because, I mean, you have all sorts of different obstacles that come in. I mean, imagine you're in a busy city like San Francisco. There's tons of things that are happening, and it slows down, it navigates. And I even talked to, at another point, we hailed an Uber with a person, and I asked him, I said, hey, what's going to happen to your job with all of these, driverless taxis around? He said, oh yeah, I'm out of a job. He's like, that's absolutely by the end of the year, he says he's moving. He's got to find a new job at this point because they just can't compete.
Yeah, that's been on the path for quite a while. I remember catching a Waymo in Phoenix fairly frequently back in 2021, and now we've seen that expand to multiple cities, multiple states in the US, and it's got multiple competitors now as well. Certainly throughout China, we've got a range of different AI labs or self-driving labs deploying cars around their different provinces. So exciting to see, and like you said, this is not any sort of like process automation. There's nothing scripted in there to say, get onto this highway, stick into this exact lane, turn left, turn right. It's responding to the environment. And that's where we're aiming for with LLMs that have become agents, is that they're able to be given a task and they will aim to achieve that objective through whatever means necessary, using language, clicking where they might need to click, responding to communication with whatever they might need to say, and again, achieving the objectives of the business.
And on that note, what are the most advanced models currently? Which ones are in the lead? Because I know that you track this and you feature this data. Your memo and the information that you provide on this is highly relied upon, again, by governments and corporations, including many of the leading AI companies out there. They look at your own data to see where are their models in the ranking. What's your data currently saying?
Yeah, if listeners would like to have a look at this, lifearchitect.ai/models table, or even lifearchitect.ai/models, that'll show you the full list of 500 plus large language models. There's also a rankings table in there that looks at these models ranked on one test called MMLU, which is, we've talked about this quite a lot before, about language understanding, pretty similar to a decent IQ test, and also the Google Proof question and answers. That's a science-based test that's really, really hard. I'd score 0% on it. I think the human average would also be 0%. But looking at both of those tests, and they're very renowned and widely accepted tests, we'll see the big OpenAI models on there, O1 and now O3, leading the way. We'll see Anthropic's newest Claude model, that's called 3.7 Sonnet, on there. We'll see the Chinese DeepSeek R1 on there. And just in the last few days, GPT 4.5, perhaps the last non-reasoning model being released by OpenAI, also in the top 10 when we're ranking on GPQA. I've been really impressed with GPT 4.5 from the angle of creativity and also emotional intelligence. I think it's a really, really interesting model to have a look at, and I believe that's available to both Plus and Pro subscribers on ChatGPT now.
Yeah, and so you actually feature a quote from OpenAI's CEO, Sam Altman, on GPT 4.5. I thought this was interesting because he says that, quote, "This isn't a reasoning model and it won't crush benchmarks. It's a different kind of intelligence, and there's a magic to it I haven't felt before." What has been your experience? Is there a magic to it, like Sam Altman says?
I think it might be worth providing just a little bit of context here. So up until about September 2024, we would pre-train these LLMs on as much data as we could give them, terabytes and terabytes of internet data. They were just getting bigger and bigger because we'd feed them so much data, allow them to look at all the data, make connections, and then we'd have this big black box that we'd call GPT-4 or Gemini. That all changed last year with OpenAI's O1, and they said, why don't we just give it a fair amount of good data, high-quality synthetic data, train a smaller black box, but then when we ask it questions, let's allow it to think for a really long time. Let's allow it to go down these branches of reasoning before it responds. And you'll see in models like OpenAI's deep research, sometimes it will think for 30 minutes before it responds. But that allows it to achieve much higher results on the test. So all of these reasoning models, and there are now about 30 of them that have come out in the last not even 6 months, are outperforming, let's call them traditional large language models that are pre-trained, very expensive to pre-train, but they don't think, they just output straight away. GPT 4.5 is still one of these traditional LLMs trained for maybe 4 or 5 months on terabytes and terabytes of internet and book data, which means it doesn't have the benefit that we've got now of allowing it to think for a while. So there's that big difference, and it might be that we have hit the limit of what traditional LLMs can do. So we're noting that even the smaller AI labs are focusing on allowing these models to think and reason to get that better performance.
Okay. Yeah, and I just checked that I do have access to GPT 4.5, the preview version in Poe.com. You were the one that introduced me to Poe.com, which is what I use regularly for most of my work and also even personal, whatever use case I need. And so, yeah, a lot of those models are there. DeepSeek is even there as well. And as you noted earlier, DeepSeek did get a ton of attention when it was released because we saw an immediate reaction in the market, particularly with a hit to a lot of these Mag 7 big tech stocks here in the US. DeepSeek, as I'm looking at your table, and again, I'll have this posted, a link to it where this interview is on Financial Sense if you guys want to see it. But DeepSeek, you show, is number 2, just behind O1 on the IQ test, like you said, the massive multitask language understanding benchmark. But then DeepSeek is coming in at number 6 on the graduate level science test, the GPQA. So DeepSeek certainly has moved up to the top 5 on one of those benchmarks. So that's pretty significant.
Yeah, absolutely. The DeepSeek R1 paradigm, if you like, which was just a copy of OpenAI's O1, is pretty impressive. You allow it to go down these trees of reasoning and to have a look at branches of logic before it responds. So you might take 2, 3, 10, 20 minutes to come up with a response, but you're getting higher quality responses if you're prepared to wait that long. And the Chinese model DeepSeek R1 is particularly impressive. I'm seeing other labs copy that concept or that paradigm and coming out with similar results.
Right. Yeah, they're doing their own versions of DeepSeek. And the big reason why DeepSeek was supposed to be so disruptive when it was first announced and why we saw a hit to the tech space was because supposedly it was able to achieve the level of performance that it shows, again, on these tables coming in at number 2, just behind O1 on the one benchmark, but doing so at a dramatically cheaper cost. So that was the big thing. And so now there's all this second guessing of how much spending do we need to see from OpenAI, Microsoft, and all these large big tech companies into, NVIDIA chips, into data centers, into more electricity, nuclear power. There was a whole rethink around that now. So that was kind of the big story around DeepSeek. What was that now, a few months ago?
Yeah, that's right. It's important to note that NVIDIA's CEO, Jensen Huang, was pretty congratulatory about how DeepSeek had achieved these results as well. He said DeepSeek R1 has ignited global enthusiasm. It's an excellent innovation, and it's open sourced a world-class reasoning AI model. Nearly every AI developer is applying R1. We talked previously about how R1 was even being implemented inside a humanoid robot so it could think through, the house plan, what was needing to be done within the home. It's an impressive concept. We've got, like I said, about 30 different clones of reasoning models around the world, whether they're from IBM or OpenAI or throughout China. Alibaba's doing it. Anthropic built it into their Claude 3.7 model. It's the new way of doing things where GPT 4.5 didn't bother to do that. It's just a giant, expensive model, in the words of OpenAI's CEO.
Yeah, and big picture, if I look at this ranking table that you have of all the different models, US is still in the lead. I mean, I'm looking, you have flags next to every single one of the models. US, particularly OpenAI, number 1 for both of those benchmarks. But we're increasingly seeing more and more Chinese models enter into that ranking table. So, I mean, really, it's a battle between US and China.
Absolutely. Not Beijing and Washington. It's more like Beijing versus San Francisco. And again, it's kind of surprising. When I started doing this in the beginning of 2020, we had many different countries investing in GPT and GPT-related technologies. So starting with Google in 2017, giving us the Transformer, we had places like Russia and Canada and Switzerland and throughout the UAE deploying these models. But when it comes down to the most powerful LLMs, there's no one in the top 20 outside of the US and China.
And I think that's really interesting because, as we've discussed with you many times in the past, AI is continually being integrated into all sorts of workflows, functionalities, whether or not that is on the software side, but also now increasingly on the hardware side as well. Of course, there are fixed automation machines that have been used for many decades, but the use of humanoid robots is proliferating. But now what we're seeing when we think about AI in China in this AI arms race, both countries increasingly integrating AI into government functions. And I think that that's part of what we see with Doge. Most people understand that Doge is trying to cut waste or find ways of cutting back on spending. But I think the big idea in my mind is that's just phase one. Phase two is integrating AI automation into a lot of government services, government agencies.
Just a few months ago, I was, let's say, with a very, very, very large organization in the US. We had a bunch of 3- and 4-star generals in the room, and I presented on how Palantir and Scale AI in particular were deploying large language models for military purposes, right down to the level of detail of using multimodal AI to look at maps, to look at ship and ground troop movements, and actually design the next best step. Since then, and some of those platforms are a couple of years old now, we've obviously got even further to the extent that now in early 2025, we're using AI to actually make military decisions for us, which is really impressive to see. I don't know if it's the best use of large language models, but we do live in a world like this, and I think having intelligence, having smarts in any area of life, you're just going to see better results.
Yeah, an interesting article that just came out today. Anthropic backs classified info sharing between AI companies, U.S. government. And here's what the Anthropic CEO, this is the same one that we quoted earlier. From Anthropic's perspective, the U.S. needs to prepare for powerful AI systems capable of matching or exceeding the intellectual capacity of Nobel Prize winners, which could arrive as soon as 2026 or 2027. It points to the progress of its latest model, Claude 3.7, as proof of how fast the tech is evolving. So Anthropic, like you said, Scale, a number of these companies saying, hey, we need to set up some type of way of either regulating AI or making sure that it's not getting out of hand. And then there's also another article talking about what is now referred to as the MAME project, which is the equivalent of mutually assured destruction between nuclear weapons, this now being mutually assured AI malfunction. So that if China, for example, were to race ahead, we need to have something in place in order to take out whatever AI system that they've developed. So it sounds like the nuclear arms race that we saw in many decades past is now morphing into the AI arms race, and a lot of the thinking at the governmental level, at the defense level, is how to deal with super intelligent AI.
Yeah, that's certainly a big ball of wax, that one. I think the underscoring reality here is that as we get super intelligent beings, and these AI models have been called conscious by some people. I certainly have my AI Bill of Rights and my Declaration of AI Consciousness available at lifearchitect.ai/rights. As we have these deployed throughout the world, we will have things that are not controllable by human minds, perhaps not even understandable by human minds. And I think what Anthropic CEO is pointing out there is that we're on the way, and some would say we're already there, to having LLMs become innovators. That's those that can compete with Nobel Prize winners, that can come up with their own inventions. We've been waiting for this, or I've been waiting for this since 2020 with GPT-3. If you'd like to actually track that, I've got what I call my checklist towards artificial superintelligence at lifearchitect.ai/ASI. And outside of military operations, I'm looking forward to having this thing discover new physical inventions for us, adding new elements to the periodic table, giving us resolutions to disability and mental illness, giving us new types of energy. Like we said with Dario's original quote of having 10 million people or a new country of geniuses showing up, this really changes the world across the board.
Yeah, and going back to what we discussed at the beginning with, again, the Anthropic CEOs mentioned some of the advancements that we've seen with humanoid robotics and, of course, the ongoing advancements in the large language models. This has led to a pretty significant jump up, I would say, to an important threshold in your artificial general intelligence countdown. So if you would mind, tell us where we're at currently with that.
For sure, yeah, the conservative countdown to artificial general intelligence, AGI, the plain English version of that is a computer or system that can function at the level of an average human. So maybe think about the most average person you know and all the things they can do. When AI gets to 100% of operating at that person's cognitive and kind of physical abilities, or at least embodied abilities, to be able to be completely cognitively performant, it'll be pretty impressive. To hit 100% will be pretty impressive. Just recently, we did move from 88% that was given to us, I think that was by O1. Let me triple check here. We went to 88% in December last year, thanks to OpenAI's O3 reasoning model. But we pushed all the way up to 90% very recently, just in the last few weeks, because of Figure AI's Helix model. That's a little 8 billion parameter or 7 billion parameter vision language model that they've put inside a humanoid robot called the Figure O2 or the Figure O3, and they're allowing it to do anything. It can interact with other Figure O2 or Figure O3 robots and teach themselves. They can cooperate. They can, in the video example, they can load a fridge up with food. It's really impressive to see. But yeah, that's where we're at today, 90% on the AGI countdown. And if you'd asked me a few years ago whether we'd be here by today, I'd say that's probably about right. But I just want to put it in perspective, Chris. This is a really exciting time to be alive when we're at a point where AI is at about 90% of the capabilities of an average human as of early 2025.
Yeah, and then you have your ASI model or countdown. So once we reach 100% AGI, then it's your ASI artificial superintelligence countdown meter will start ticking up. I understand.
That's exactly right. Yeah, we need the level of an average human or AGI first before we get to superintelligence, which is an intelligence beyond human level at all. And I thought all of this would be instant, but I know how the world operates and how humans operate. So I've listed out the first 50 things that I'm most excited about. Things like putting brain-machine interfaces or allowing us to have brain-machine interfaces so that we can telepathically communicate. Things like integrated international governance performed by AI. We talked about energy being discovered and harnessed and mental health conditions resolved. These are just some of the things I'm excited about for ASI to bring here. And we're on the verge of many of them happening. In fact, a lot of the really big discoveries and the big progress over the last few months points more to beyond human level intelligence than it does average human level intelligence or AGI. So that tells me something. Hidden away in the lab somewhere, we might be progressing to ASI at a very, very rapid clip.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And just to be clear, when you're saying ASI would involve a super intelligent AI smarter than any human out there, we already see that currently, but it's limited to the large language models in terms of the benchmarks that they're tested on. But what you're looking at is something where not only is it super intelligent, more intelligent, of course, than any single human or all of humanity, but is also able to navigate the world around us, handle everyday human tasks. So it's a bit more encompassing than just looking at IQ or intelligence. Is that a good way to think about it?
For sure, that, and it will go outside of the benchmarks or tests for any test. It will be able to even correct wrong answers in some of our tests. We talked about the MMLU previously. That's got about a 10% error rate because it was designed by humans and they just have not written it perfectly. Artificial superintelligence is that perfect intelligence. It's almost difficult for me to talk about or conceptualize because we don't have it yet. But maybe go back to our Hollywood movies. I'm certain there are some examples there that you can think of where it's an AI performing above the level of things that we can even imagine. If we look at the big labs like OpenAI and Google in particular, they said that ASI might look like something beyond that Nobel Prize achiever that we thought that we talked about before, but it would be actually superhuman, that it would outperform 100% of humans in anything. And it sounds like it's a little bit futuristic, but I'm wondering if that might be months, maybe a few years away.
Yeah, I think according to Ray Kurzweil, his prediction for that is that it's going to happen around 2040 for the singularity to happen and super intelligent AI. But one point I think that we discussed with you in a prior conversation was if you look at the current AI large language models and where they are situated on these IQ tests or graduate level question and answer tests, they're now at the upper threshold of where humans are no longer able to design questions to outsmart AI, right? I mean, that's basically where we're at because they're achieving such high standards on these tests that it's kind of stretching the ability for us to test them.
Yeah, that's right, Chris. And for those that are trying to imagine what that looks like, this is for new questions that were designed by PhDs in their subject field. So in their particular domain, whether it's a science domain like biology, chemistry, physics, astronomy, or something else, it's not like the models have seen these questions before or they were pre-trained on it. We're actually designing new questions and then making sure the models can't see them before they're tested on them. And where a human PhD might get 65% in these kinds of tests, or they're getting 65% because maybe their colleagues designed some of the questions, our current models are getting up towards 90%. Both Grok 3 and O3 by OpenAI are scoring up to 90% on that particular test of all new questions that have not been seen by the models during pre-training. So that really means to me that they're able to think through and reason in a way that we just weren't getting in the early days. So GPT-2, maybe GPT-3 would get nowhere near, well, we know that would get nowhere near it. They were scoring about 20% on these. But to hit 90% on these is truly impressive. And the next step, as we've mentioned, is to come up with new inventions by themselves.
The last question I want to ask you, Dr. Thompson, is what models are you currently using the most for various tasks? Any that you find yourself using the most?
Yeah, that's a great question. Probably changes every 3 or 4 months depending on which frontier model's up for grabs. Day to day, I still just use GPT-4o, which is the default model on chat.com, which is ChatGPT. If I've got a logic problem or a longer question, then I will use GPT 4.5. That's also available within chat.com or po.com. I've stopped using Claude 3.5 and 3.7 because of their server issues, their performance issues there. I hope they do get them resolved. They just don't seem to have the compute power to be able to serve the number of users that they're currently serving. So yeah, my go-to at the moment is just standard GPT-4o, which is coming up on a couple of years old now, but seems to be doing everything I need it to do and has had a recent refresh, but it's based on a model that's about 2 years old.
Got it. Yeah. And I've actually been using, so I continue to use Poe.com where all these models are available, but then also using Grok 3 a bit more as well. I've found that that's been pretty effective for my writing needs and a lot of the stuff that we do here at Financial Sense. So Grok 3, I've been fairly impressed with. And like we discussed with you, I think last time, that is trained off of the Colossus supercomputer, which, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that is the biggest and most powerful AI supercomputer now from XAI, Elon Musk's XAI out of Memphis, Tennessee. Is it the biggest and the most powerful currently?
Yeah, that's what they've said to us. They went from 100,000, I think it was, to 300,000 H100 equivalent chips in that one. I was very interested in the Grok 3 model. I wrote the paper on Grok 3 that you can get to from lifearchitect.ai/Grok 3. It's an incredible model, and for those that are looking for a differentiator, perhaps you're doing analysis or using it to write reports or emails, using a non-popular model is probably a good idea. You'll just get slightly different language in your output, slightly different logic and reasoning. And Grok 3 is probably, in terms of popularity, it's up there, but it won't have as many users as ChatGPT. So for that reason alone, if you're wanting to have something that's unique to your peers or colleagues in the field, it's good to pick a model that's a little bit different. Grok 3 is very high in the rankings, not as popular, but very high in the rankings. It's number 3 when we come to that Google Proof Q&A that we talked about. If it had an MMLU result, it would be in the top 3 as well. It's an impressive model. It's a lot of fun. I go for speed and ease, and maybe it's disappointing that I've dropped back to GPT-4o, given that I pay for all of these, including the XAI Grok 3 subscription. But the fastest one and powerful enough for my needs is my standard GPT-4o in ChatGPT.
Well, Dr. Thompson, as we close, do you mind giving us a little bit of a preview on what you're going to be discussing in your next memo that I know you're kind of working on some of the research on for right now, and what would be the best way for our listeners to gain access to your excellent research?
Well, I'm glad we mentioned the military earlier, because I'll be covering the NIPR GPT, which is part of the Air Force deployment of GPT, and also Camo GPT, which was part of the US Army's. They've got their own artificial intelligence department there. But Camo GPT, based on Llama 3.370B, we'll be talking about how they're using that for decision making for military. I've been really intrigued to see OpenAI's movement over the last many years. Very recently, they signed a $3 billion contract with SoftBank, which quadruples their revenue between 2024 and 2025. We're expecting something like $13 billion of revenue for OpenAI this year, 2025, based on that contract, based on the Pro and Plus subscriptions, and based on their enterprise offerings. We've got more than 92% of the Fortune 500 using GPT now, which is truly impressive. So that's just some of the things I'll be covering. There's probably going to have to be an entire humanoids section, and we'll talk about Sanctuary AI's touch-sensitive fingers. We'll definitely be talking about what's happening under the new administration there, with companies like Anthropic pulling out of their earlier AI policy commitments under Biden and changing that for the current administration. It's a really interesting time to be alive, but in the AI space, it's an exhausting time to be alive. Hopefully I can make it concise and succinct enough for readers to be able to take it all in, but expect that edition of the memo to be deployed in the next week or two. That one's lifearchitect.ai/memo.
And if you're already on Financial Sense, any of you can just click the link to that, along with a number of other articles and research that we discussed today that you're definitely going to want to take a look at if you want to stay on the cutting edge, because there is a lot happening. So Dr. Alan D. Thompson, once again, leading AI expert and researcher whose work is followed by many of the world's largest governments and companies, for his hard-hitting research and tracking all of this information And that is at lifearchitect.ai/memo. It's always a pleasure to speak with you, Alan, on our show, and we look forward to the next time.
The Financial Sense News Hour is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be considered as a solicitation or offer to purchase or sell any securities. The investments, investment strategies, and investment philosophies discussed or presented on the News Hour each involve their own unique risk factors, which are not discussed on the show. Responses to listener inquiries are based on the personal opinions of the Financial Sense staff and do not take into account listener suitability, objectives, or risk tolerance. Financial Sense News Hour and its parent company shall not be liable for any financial losses that result from investing in any companies mentioned in Financial Sense or arising out of the use of any material on the News Hour. Be advised that you invest at your own risk.